You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I'm your host, Steph. It's Monday, June 12th, and joining me today, as always on a Monday, is Chris. How's it going today, Chris?
Doing well, my friend. How you doing?
I'm not too bad, You know, it's the quiet time of the year when it comes to 49ers and football content in general. You know, there's little news around here. Dalvin Cook, DeAndre Hopkins, what's going to happen with them? But as far as the 49ers go, it's pretty quiet right now. And I don't mind that. You know, I really don't. I feel like there's some good topics that we can touch on with the 49ers without, necessarily having to create, topics in a way. And what I want to do in the time between 49ers mandatory minicamp, which, as we know, happened last week. It ended last week. To training camp, which will happen at the end of next month or towards the end of next month. I just want to go through the 49ers position groups and just talk about some of the questions that we have, what's going to happen, this offseason leading up to the season and whatnot. And so I want to start talking about the running backs, state of the 49ers running backs, right? As we know, Christian McCaffrey, he's the head honcho, as he should be in maybe the entire NFL, right? I still can't believe he's on the Niners. Someone pinch me. But I think this is a great topic because there are some question marks. There's some reports both about, Elijah Mitchell, Jordan Mason we've been hearing that it's a little interesting. Could we see some movement aside from Christian McCaffrey? And I don't know, by movement, you can mean could there be a trade at some point with, Elijah Mitchell or TDP or one of those guys get dropped or are we just looking at a guy like Jordan Mason leapfrogging Elijah Mitchell on the depth chart? That could also be the movement we're talking about, but we're going to talk about pretty much all the scenarios today. And so, of course, we're going to start with Christian McCaffrey because he's a low-hanging fruit, man. I could talk about Christian McCaffrey forever. And he, of course, last season was traded to the 49ers midseason. He played his first 6 games with Carolina, 11 with San Francisco. That is including playoffs. And his yards per reception increased from 8.4 to 8.9 after joining the 49ers. So a slight increase there in his receptions, and also his reception percentage increased from 80.5 to 85.2 then with the 49ers. So I feel like that's a probably result of Shanahan maybe scheming things up a little bit better for McCaffrey than, when he was in Carolina. And, of course, McCaffrey not having to do it all on his own, not having to bear the, pressure of carrying the team and the defense, responding to that. He now plays with a better supporting cast. So there's those times where you see McCaffrey open for a check down almost always, just because the defense has to account for other guys on the field too. So yeah, I think obviously we saw Christian McCaffrey do a lot of things with the 49ers last season. We saw several offensive categories get a boost after the Christian McCaffrey trade for the 49ers. And so I guess I'm kind of wondering, what are the expectations for CMC in a full season with this team?
Yeah, so with the complete offseason and, early returns have been that Christian McCaffrey's been out there, working hard, being a leader, breaking down practices at the end and everything like that. He's completely ingratiated himself with the roster, I think, and obviously with the coaching staff and such. So I expect big things from Christian McCaffrey, this upcoming season. I think in addition to just Kyle Shanahan's scheme being what it is, I think that there's a familiarity that Kyle Shanahan also is growing or accumulating, if you will, as time has gone after that midseason trade, and then a couple more extra games, obviously, in the playoffs. So I think Shanahan's going to be cooking stuff up, obviously, to, identify ways to unleash him, differently, or maybe even similar to how he did last year. So I have a lot of high expectations. I'll be interested to see, in the passing game, if that translates. He was a focal, point of that aspect of the passing game last year. And not that, Shanahan would look to take the ball out of Christian's hands, going through the air, but maybe the threat of him being out there may be more impactful than him actually getting the ball in some respects, especially considering the emergence of, Brandon Ayuk, who I think has always been good, but he had his, strong season last year. Of course, you got Debo already saying that he feels as though he didn't have a good season last year, so he'll be looking to, have a bounce back year in his terms. So that being said, it may result in, and of course, there's always George Kittle. May result maybe in a few less catches for Christian McCaffrey. But yeah, remains to be seen. We'll see what that looks like. But what do you think? I'm thinking that he'll probably build upon what he did last year. I'm trying to remember. He wasn't a Pro Bowl. I think he was a Pro. I think he initially didn't make the Pro Bowl last year.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I see him for sure making the Pro Bowl this year after a full season in Shanahan's offense.
Yeah, I'm going to take it a step further because, quite honestly, the Pro Bowl is more so a popularity contest. Yeah. And I feel like, yes, Christian McCaffrey should have been voted to that regardless of, him switching teams midseason. But I'm going to take it a step further. Barring any injury for Christian McCaffrey, I'd expect him to have an offensive player of the year type of year. And to say that about most players, I think that would be a bold prediction. I don't even think that's a bold prediction when it comes to a player like Christian McCaffrey. I feel like he is so talented that he should always be in consideration, or he always has a skill set to at least be a consideration for OPOY. But now being on the 49ers where, he's used the way that he is and he can put up numbers because he isn't the only guy making things happen on the offense. I think he's going to have the numbers to make a strong case for offensive player of the year, and it would be great. I mean, in 11 games with the 49ers last season, and this, of course, is including the playoffs, McCaffrey totaled 1,210 all-purpose yards and also totaled 10 total touchdowns. So, I mean, that to be able to do that in 11 games, and you look at what he could possibly do then in 16, of course, like as I said, bearing any injury, right? That's still very impressive. You look at that many all-purpose yards and you maybe put that in a span of 16 games and, you're probably getting to the 2000s, right? So don't ask me to do math, but I'm just assuming, I'm rounding up probably. But yeah, that's what I'm expecting. And with all of the reports that we're hearing of Christian McCaffrey just, taking the reins in this running back group, and not just the running back group, but I feel he's setting a great example for everyone on this team to, come in even in the off season, even in OTAs, mini camp, and, go gung ho and, do full effort every single practice, I think is a great example. And Christian McCaffrey told reporters at some point last week, I'm just trying to learn as much as possible. It's nice to be able to start from square one and getting right with Coach Turner. It's Bobby Turner, of course, and making sure it's not just learning the plays, but learning every single detail of the positions. So having a full off season to grasp this offense, I think sky's the limit for Christian, I think if he's going that in depth to not only understanding what his job is as a running back, but everyone else's, as he said, he's trying to learn every single detail of the positions. I mean, I think I can only expect real great things for McCaffrey in 2023.
I agree. And, I'd be surprised if he wasn't, voted by the players as being a captain even this upcoming season. Maybe we'll have a conversation or something. We can talk about that obviously offline, but like about maybe, identifying who captains could be for the upcoming season later on this summer. But yeah, I mean, Christian McCaffrey is really solidifying himself as being the leader, and he made a lot happen for this team. One of the metrics that you were mentioning or made allusion to earlier was even our points per game. Points per game went up after that trade as well. Margin of victory as well. Also, just to your point, just the way that the defenses are being stressed, as you talked about earlier, with the additional supporting cast that exists in San Francisco in comparison to where he was in Carolina. So, yeah, I think you made a good point. I think sky is the limit for him. I still would think that, like, I don't know. I think his sweet spot, I would like for his sweet spot to be like 17, 18, like 20 touches a game from a running back standpoint. Maybe get some more in the passing game just to keep some of the miles off of him, which I know we're going to talk about the rest of the room coming up. But I think that to preserve his body for what ultimately is hopefully a long playoff run.
Yeah, exactly. And you can say that the 49ers maybe even got lucky, last season with him being able to stay, healthy enough to be available for games in the time that he was with San Francisco last year, right? The 11 games that we spoke about. But of course, you do want to protect that investment to an extent. You also want to use that investment because you did give up a lot to acquire him. But you do also want to protect him, and that's where some of the other running backs on this team come along. I mean, let's talk first about Elijah Mitchell, who, pre-Christian McCaffrey, he did have an incredible rookie season with the 49ers. You look at his stats, and it's kind of hard to believe that we're even having this conversation about Mitchell today, like possibly, being in competition for RB2, because he put up RB1 numbers in his rookie season, 963 rushing yards. That was a franchise record for a rookie running back. But even in his rookie season, he played just 11 games. So that right there highlights, I guess it was a precursor to his second year where he only played 5 games, where he was only available for 5 games. That's an issue, right? And that not only is an issue, but it's a trend. And I guess you could say because it's a trend, it's an issue. He had 6 attempts before getting hurt in week 1 of last year. He had 7 attempts before getting hurt in week 12 last year. So Elijah Mitchell's first injury that kept him out several weeks is probably at least part of the reason I think that the 49ers needed to make that splash trade for McCaffrey. And because they needed a run game, really bad. They knew probably that they weren't going to be able to get to where they wanted to go without a run game and without someone who maybe is a little more reliable. So we did get to see Elijah Mitchell and Christian McCaffrey together in just 3 games last season. And to me, I felt like they worked pretty well together in tandem. It looked like a pretty good 1-2 punch, and Mitchell could spell McCaffrey pretty effectively. For example, in the week 10 game versus the Chargers, Mitchell handled 18 carries. If your RB2 can do that, I mean, that's pretty valuable, right? But again, the bottom line with Mitchell has been that he can't stay on the field. He can't do this consistently. And so if you are trying to get Mitchell, 18 carries, is that too much? Is his body going to wear down? So that then puts in question, is he the right RB2 for this team, right? And I feel like that's just where we are right now. And he did miss some of he missed mandatory minicamp, and I think part of OTAs with an undisclosed injury. It's considered minor, but again, we don't know what it is, and the season hasn't even started yet. He's already hurt again. That doesn't give me much confidence that something has suddenly changed with Mitchell's, unreliability from the health standpoint.
Yeah, Elijah Mitchell. So, we were talking about this before we started the show, and certainly for one, going back to his rookie year, right? Like, it's a shame that he only had played those 11 games. Shanahan hasn't had $1,000. He has a lot more than $1,000. Shanahan hasn't had 1,000-yard rusher in his time in San Francisco, and had Mitchell even played 1, 2, definitely 3 more games, he'd have definitely crushed that 1,000-yard mark. So that would have been a great milestone for him to achieve. I think rookie year he had rib issues, and he had a finger, a shoulder, like he was just beat up or whatever. Throw him a little bit of bail on the injury in Chicago. I mean, making that cutback and then someone diving into his knee. I mean, there's not much you can do there from a MCL standpoint. I think that took him out like at least 8 games or something like that, 8 or 9 games. So that took out half of his season. To your point, 4 carries into the year. So I really think that time moves fast, right? In the NFL, as you mentioned, it's hard to even believe that we're talking about him potentially falling down the depth chart when he's had such success thus far in his career. Well, his rookie season, and then when he's in doing well, as you mentioned and highlighted the Chargers game. It's crazy because you may have the stats, Steph, but I think I recently heard, I believe that when Elijah Mitchell was in there, he has like the highest yards per carry of any running back since Shanahan has been in San Francisco. He's productive. Like he can ball. You know what I mean? It's just a shame that he can't stay healthy. And as a result of that, he may potentially, have to, go fall back to, running back 3 position as opposed to being the primary backup to Christian McCaffrey. Yeah, I mean, another frustration that I had, is now granted the game went the way it went. Brock got hurt. Then Josh Johnson got hurt, but he had a pretty decent game against Seattle in the divisional round. And then we heard that, the week leading up to the NFC Championship game, he was missing some practice. I was hoping it was just him being banged up or getting some rest or something. Then he wasn't even a go, right? He wasn't even a go for the NFC Championship. And to your point, he's injured again. So, I'm really concerned in that standpoint as it relates to really, a weapon because I would consider him to be a weapon. I think a healthy Mitchell and healthy McCaffrey is a devastating backfield, in my opinion. And if he doesn't get, healthy, if he doesn't have the opportunity to really go out there and show what he can do, he definitely, I believe, will lose that position.
Yeah, and going back to some of the injuries that he suffered, in the time that he's been in the league, September 2021 suffered that shoulder injury. November 2021 suffered a rib injury. Week after that, or a few days after that, suffered a finger fracture in the Week 10 game against the Rams. December 5th had a concussion. That can happen to anyone. December 8th, he had some knee irritation in addition to the concussion in that Week 14 game, and he missed 3 games because of that. August 12th, 2022 now, he missed a couple weeks of practice with a hamstring pull. And then in September, in which at this point we're kind of getting close to where we're at now in this point of this year, where we're hearing that he has an undisclosed injury. But September 2022 is when he suffered the MCL sprain in Week 1. And then again, November 27th, another MCL sprain, which kept him out the rest of the year. So it's just it's an unkind pattern that has been going on with Mitchell. And of course, when it comes to players who deal with injuries like this a lot and they just can't seem to stay healthy, you want them to turn it around, and you look at the offseason as an opportunity to do that, because usually you're not really gonna, once you're banged up like that, not really gonna correct that in season, right? Usually you need the offseason to kind of reset. But with the fact that we're already hearing that he has an injury again, I'm not confident that he can stay on the field. And that really worries me. And to your question about, or to your point about his efficiency, he is very efficient. In 2021, his rookie season, he had 4.7 yard per carry average. Last season, of course, a very small sample size, 45 carries, but he had a 6.2 average then. So he's a great runner. Like we can't argue with the fact that he's a great running back. He just has the issue of staying on the field. Meanwhile, his counterpart, Jordan Mason, while all that's going on with Mitchell, like Mason has reportedly stood out this offseason with his extra opportunities, and he's gotten those extra opportunities because Mitchell is out again. So on his 43 rushing attempts last season, Mason maintained a 6 yards per carry average. So he's also a very efficient runner, a different style of runner, I'd say, than Elijah Mitchell, of course, but still very effective and, can get yards after contact. He didn't have a ton of opportunities last year, as highlighted by just the 43 rushing attempts. But, when he did play, he proved that he can be special. And I think I'm very, very intrigued by Jordan Mason. I think we all are, ever since what we saw in training camp last year, what we saw in preseason. I mean, I think there's a lot of buzz around Jordan Mason, and for good reason. Like sometimes, us fans, we get really hung up on certain players and we get really excited, and sometimes those players don't really amount to anything. But I feel that's different with Jordan Mason. There's something there. And the reason why I think it's important to maybe consider that Mason could climb up the depth chart is because of what Anthony Lynn said on the CMC effect. And we talked about this a few episodes ago, and I'll just repeat the quote. He said, quote, "You don't want to have two offenses. You don't want to have Christian come out for a water break and have the next guy come in and have to call different plays. So our guys have had to evolve and do more in the passing game," end quote. And so who has the edge as a pass catcher? Because I think ultimately that maybe that could be what it comes down to, Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason. I mean, Elijah Mitchell only had 3 targets for 7 total receiving yards in the 5 games he played last season. In 2021, his rookie season, when he was more or less like the lead back most of that time. Through his 11 games he played, he had 20 targets. So a decent amount. I wouldn't put him on the McCaffrey level, but he's handled some carries here and there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Really, if we're being honest, I mean, availability is going to probably be the key thing between the two of them, and then maybe one B will be their ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. Yeah, and another thing is, much like how what Brock Purdy has put on tape, is giving him the spot of being like the leader in the clubhouse, as Shanahan and Lynch have said thus far. I also think that Jordan Mason has put some decent stuff on tape as well in Elijah Mitchell's absence last year. And I think that maybe Shanahan relied on him a little bit less than he would have otherwise, because they had Christian McCaffrey and because Jordan Mason was a rookie. But yeah, he was in that closer role for a few different games there to kind of seal the deal with the lead and such. I think he runs with power. I think I saw some reports that he's kind of like slimmed down a little bit to work on his speed and his agility and everything like that. And he's been working on catching the ball out of the backfield. So, some of the reports that I've seen coming out of the mini camp and OTAs was that he was looking good. He was looking good catching the ball out of the backfield and everything. So simply, the availability aspect, conceivably the fact that he's going to build upon the rookie year that he had last year. I only expect him to get better. And, certainly, even, and it could be argued that even in good health, that potentially Jordan Mason might be the guy that is in that RB2 position, even if Elijah Mitchell is healthy.
Yeah, I definitely think there'll be an argument for that, just given Jordan Mason just feels like he's on an ascension. And, going back to the topic of, him catching out of the backfield, Jordan Mason didn't have any targets out of the backfield last season. It simply wasn't his role. But again, reports out of OTAs and minicamp is that he looks like a natural pass catcher. Matt Barrows of The Athletic wrote a bit about Mason in his recent article, or one of his recent articles. And he said, 1 second, let me find the quote. But basically, catching out of the backfield is new for him and TDP, but Mason isn't for lack of ability. Here's a quote. Mason said, quote, "People think I learned how to catch out of the blue, but I've always been able to do it. I was just never utilized that way." His size has always led himself to being more of a bruiser, downhill runner, a closer, but if he continues to show that this is something he can do well through training camp, I think it's going to be tough to keep him out of the backfield and give him an expanded role.
I agree. And I think there's precedent for it too, even kind of rolling with the three-headed monster, right? Like in 19, there was Matt Breida, Raheem Mostert, and Tevin Coleman even that were all getting some love, even though I think Tevin Coleman was the primary starter, he wasn't always the one leading in carries by the end of the game. So, I think that could be quite a dynamic backfield, if the three of them could be healthy for the majority of the season. Obviously that's the best case scenario, but even so, I think that really ideally what that really does, beyond just giving the offense different looks and the defense different things to worry about and game plan for, I think it also really, really helps probably what the primary goal and objective is, and that's to keep Christian McCaffrey fresh, right? So I think that it'll be interesting to see. I'm curious to see how training camp goes and how things are looking. Because it's arguably, training camps in 39 days or something like that, 38 days or 40 days or something. Elijah Mitchell may be fine. He may be fine and healthy and totally cool by then and have a good training camp. But regardless, I'm really curious to see, because I feel like we kind of know what Elijah Mitchell is, even though he can't, not to say he can't get better, but I really want to see how Jordan Mason is looking, having, taken that kind of like, that step going into his second year.
Yeah, I agree. I think altogether, the question that needs to be answered by the coaches is, and this should help them make their decision, is there anything that Elijah Mitchell can do that Jordan Mason can't? Right. And so we'll see. I think we've maybe seen some glimpses. I might say, and maybe we don't have a large enough sample size to say this too confidently quite yet, but I'm leaning towards saying that Jordan Mason, one, he'll probably stay healthier, although the Jordan Mason also hasn't handled that many carries in the NFL yet, so that's to be seen. But I think also you can argue that Jordan Mason could probably be a better pass catcher than Elijah Mitchell. But again, those are things that need to be seen in training camp, need to be seen in preseason to really know for certain. Let's talk about another guy in this backfield that, we're really trying to still figure out what role, Ty Davis-Price is going to have on this team. He appeared in 6 games last season. One of those was against Atlanta, in which he only played 1 snap. So if you want to say that he only played 5 games, I think you could say that too. But on his 34 attempts last season, he finished with a 2.9 yards per carry average. Not great. So kind of opposite of Jordan Mason, who has done a lot with his opportunities. Ty Davis-Price has had some opportunities, but just has underperformed in that time. He had 2 targets versus the Chiefs in week 7, but did not catch either of those. So I kind of wonder, I don't know what to expect out of TDP. I kind of wonder if he's an odd man out, or do the 49ers still see some potential in him? I think training camp will answer that, but also I think it's important for him to prove his worth on this roster. He has to prove that he has value to this team. And one way to do that, as I've mentioned before, is finding a place on special teams. Like, if you're going to be 4th on the depth chart, you got to do something else. You know what I mean? You have to play special teams if you want. I mean, he probably wouldn't be active on game days if the 49ers choose to keep CMC, Elijah Mitchell, and Jordan Mason, and those guys are active on game days. TDP is probably on the outside looking inactive. Of course, unless he proves to look better in training camp, and if he shows that he can play some special teams too.
Absolutely. So real quick before I transition to TDP, so you were kind of mentioning in your final comments about Mason and Mitchell about potentially the differentiating factor might be like what one can do that the other can't. And one thing I do realize is that, or that I believe, is that Elijah Mitchell has that home run ability. I mean, coming out, he was, I think, clocked at 4.3 in the 40, and Mason's like about 4.58. So that could be potentially, a differentiating factor. But, again, like I said, I know that, Mason's been working on his body to try to get more agile and so on. So that could be something that, could influence, where one is over the other potentially coming out of training camp. But, Ty Davis Price, that's, going back to what I was mentioning earlier about Elijah Mitchell. Yeah, just because we didn't see him get too much run last year. It's interesting. I'm not sure what to think of him. People love him though. I maybe loving is a strong word, but people have a lot of the beat writers that I'll follow, or even some of the other podcasters who make it out to like training camp and so on, speak highly of Ty Davis Price. I don't know. I mean, again, I haven't personally seen that. I think that when he had the few times that we did see him in the game, I wasn't sure that he was seeing the field very well. But I could say that same thing about Elijah Mitchell when his rookie year, right? When early in the season, after Raheem Mostert went down, I didn't think that Elijah Mitchell was necessarily seeing the field very well. But as the season went on, he got better at that in his vision. So it may be a circumstance of TDP needing to get some more reps, more time in the system, practice, watching tape, working with the coaching staff, so on, learning from other players, and so on and so forth in that regard. So, I'm with you, though. I can see – I don't know that TDP will be on the outside looking in, but to your point, if he is able to solidify a special teams role, that would be that'll probably be in his benefit to be able to stick. But I do know that there are some other running backs as well that we have in that room as well. Also, that might be challenging for him in regard to sticking to the 53.
Yeah, and those guys are Kalen Laborn and Ronald Awatt. Both guys were undrafted free agents. As of right now, I'm not considering them a threat to Ty Davis Price. I think Davis Price's only threat is to himself, right? Like if he doesn't show up in training camp like the 49ers need him to, then I think that'll be an issue. But other than that, like if he can at least be, I think decent, I think he's going to be on this roster unless, Laborn or Awatt have a Jordan Mason type of training camp and, just look amazing, which we've seen it happen, right? We've seen undrafted free agents, turn some heads in training camp in the preseason. So it could definitely happen, but as of right now, I'm not really considering those guys as being threats. I think those guys will probably most likely stick to the practice squad just based on them being undrafted free agents. I know Mayogo has also said like he doesn't see any of the undrafted free agents making the 53. So I'm just kind of going to go based off of that. We can definitely see those guys make it to the practice squad. And so I think right now we're looking at Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, Jordan Mason, and TDP being on this 53. And I think that's a solid group of guys, and you're going to need some guys on the practice squad too, just in case any of those guys get hurt. You want to bring them up. But I know I've mentioned a lot, Elijah Mitchell, he could be a trade candidate, but I don't know. Like, I don't think they necessarily need to do that. But at the same time, if he continues to struggle with injury, I think I'd rather just have Jordan Mason be, the RB2.
I'm with you on that. Yeah, I agree. At this point today, I would rather, Elijah Mitchell fall down the depth chart as opposed to, him being moved really actually, as opposed to him being cut, like the only circumstance in which, if we're putting him in a trade package for somebody. I mean, I saw a report today. Not sure how you feel about this, Steph, but I saw a report today about the Niners being one of the perceived landing spots for Chase Young if he's included in a trade package. Going to a team leaving Washington, the receiving team only has to pay like $5.32 million of his salary next year. So, for instance, I wouldn't be opposed to kicking the tires on Chase Young, but at any rate, if he's included in a trade package, for somebody, I can understand that. But, other than that, I wouldn't want to see Elijah Mitchell get cut outright or released. I think it's notable that, there have been other players on the Niners who have had injury not concerns, but issues earlier in their career, notably like Eric Armstead, oh my goodness, Jimmy Ward early in his career had injury issues. And I'm not saying that, Elijah Mitchell is going to, be a Pro Bowl player like those guys were. But I still feel that with him, it's not so much scheme. It's not fit like it was with Trey Sermon, for instance. When he's in there, he's productive. Whether it's a matter of learning how to take care of his body better or, really getting some help outside the building from a conditioning standpoint. I really believe that, when he is able to go, he's on point. So I would hate to give up on him just yet, but if we go into this, season and he sticks to the 53, which I'm thinking he will, and he still has injury issues and such, then at that point you're looking at what? This is his third year. At that point, you may have to move on, especially if Jordan Mason is emerging as it looks like he is, and especially if Tyus Price takes hold, for instance, and he's a solid, 3 at that point if they were to move on from Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, definitely some decisions to be made, but of course, luckily, the most important decision is who's going to be RB2, who's going to be RB1. That is already solidified, written in Sharpie, and it's Christian McCaffrey. So I'm glad we don't have to worry about that. And I'm also glad that, it's possible that this team goes to a 3-headed rushing attack and they go committee. But I think we also know that even if they went committee, it's not going to be a even split for all those guys. It's going to be the Christian McCaffrey show. Yep. And then whoever, can be RB2 and, could pick up some of that slack if whoever that is, whether it's Jordan Mason or Elijah Mitchell. But I'm looking forward to training camp and to seeing how these guys do. Again, can Elijah stay healthy? That's one thing to keep an eye on throughout training camp. Can Jordan Mason keep up what he's shown so far in minicamp and OTAs? Those are some of the things that I think we can continue to look to. And then, of course, Tyus Price. Can he look like a guy in this team? Could he make the 53? Does he deserve to be on the 53? I think all those questions are going to be answered before the season begins. And, I'm looking forward to it. It's a pretty solid group of guys.
Yeah, I agree. And, in an ideal world, they make it through training camp all healthy and the best guys, obviously Christian McCaffrey's position is solidified, but the other 3, ideally they get through training camp healthy and the best, person puts his, foot forward and they identify themselves as being the best in that room. Not as a result of injury or something like that. That's what I'm really excited to see, in particular with the running back room, because I think it's strong. And I'm not, it's always, I always personally, I get that kind of thought in the back of my mind. Well, oh man, if XYZ player didn't get hurt, would he have really been better than the player that we have out there or whatever? So at any rate, I like to really, hopefully get through, training camp with a healthy running back room to really see how those guys are looking through the preseason for that matter. I do have a wild card question for you, Steph, if we have some time. So real quick, I'll ask you, since we're talking about running backs, right? And, you mentioned Dalvin Cook at the beginning of the show, and I'm not going the Dalvin Cook route, but it's kind of like a chess thing, right? So I'm curious if, it's well known that Dalvin Cook is, has interest in going to the Dolphins. If Dalvin Cook goes to the Dolphins, that running back room might be kind of crowded over there. Would you consider or have any interest of thinking about a reunion with any of the, former Niner players that are in the backfield in Miami?
I mean, the question is who would be the odd man out in that scenario, right? I mean, I
think it would be Jeff Wilson. I think it would be Jeff Wilson.
Possibly, yeah, Jeff Wilson. I haven't looked at like a recent depth chart of theirs, but I know they got their running back room is so unnecessarily deep. They have Moser, who tops the list. Then they have Jeff Wilson. They have Myles Gaskin. Yep. And then they have Devin Achane. They just drafted him, didn't they?
Yep.
Yeah, so
I believe so.
So I would say Myles Gaskin is probably the odd man out there. And if I recall, he was on the team before, McDaniel even got there. So he's somewhat of an inherited player that
That's true. That's a good point.
Probably more so on the outs than in. So he's probably the guy, in which case, I don't think the 49ers would really be interested in that.
No, I'm with you. No, I was just curious what your thoughts were about that. Because,
good question,
oh, no, yeah, I feel you. I really like the fact that, 3/4 of the running back room, they're all on rookie contracts, rookie deals, which I think is pretty cool. So they're kind of, that room is cost controlled for some time. Obviously, McCaffrey's getting his money, but it's not like we're investing a lot, beyond Christian McCaffrey and the remaining running backs and such. So, but yeah, I was just curious about your thoughts about that. I saw some talk about potentially, Raheem or Jeff Wilson Jr. being, on the outs if Dalvin Cook actually lands there. But yeah, I feel really good with who the Niners have on the team, and not to sound like super biased, I realize I am, but I like the construction of the running back room.
I do too, and I feel like with Christian McCaffrey being the head guy, I think there's some stability there. Like, he's always going to be the RB1. No one's jumping him on the depth chart, right?
Yep.
Bearing any injury, but I think like to start every season, we're riding with Sharpie, like I said, Christian McCaffrey, RB1, right? So that's nice because I feel like in the Shanahan era, we haven't had much of that. Every offseason, there's a bit of a shuffle or there's a bit of a committee. So it's nice to have
or whatever,
yeah, it's nice that there's one guy who you can kind of set your clock to, or whatever the saying is. But Chris, I appreciate you joining me today on this Monday.
Yeah, thank you.
And thanks all you guys that tuned in. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. Like I said, it's a slow period of the 49ers offseason, NFL offseason in general. But we're going to be doing the state of the 49ers, going through all the position groups, all the questions that we have leading up to training camp. So I'll be going live again on Thursday. Stay tuned for that. But for now, have a good rest of your Monday, people. Peace.